Language learning in the UK is declining with limited options beyond mainstream languages like Spanish, French, and German. And despite the presence of hundreds of other languages in the local communities in the UK, our next guest will explore the divide between mainstream and heritage language education. It's my pleasure to introduce CEO at the Association of Translation Companies, Raisa McNab. Welcome, Raisa. And may I add, LC Agency is a very proud member of ATC.
Fabulous. Thank you for having me. And let me just share my screen. You should be able to see that now. Thanks, Amina.
Thank you.
So my name is Raisa McNab. I'm CEO at the Association of Translation Companies. I am a language person. I've always been a language person. And I wanted to approach this conversation and today's discussions, which have been really fantastic, from a slightly different angle. So exploring these divides between mainstream or heritage languages and the aspects that impact on their education in the UK, and also the constraints that we're seeing in our daily lives. But I wanted to start with a personal note and compare my own mainstream journey to my daughter's heritage language journey. So I'm not a bilingual person by birth. My first language is Finnish, and English was my first foreign language. After that, I got excited, so I've studied French, Swedish, and German at school, and then continued on to university. So I'm a translator by training, English and French with Finnish. So I've gone through the very traditional mainstream journey, and although I've always been, especially having spent my entire working career in the language services industry, been exposed to multilingualism, and since joining the ATC as a CEO, I've been increasingly working with speakers of community and heritage languages and working together with translators, interpreters, other associations, ATC members and public sector authorities on providing public service translation and interpreting. But it's only since my daughter Elsie was born 9 years ago that I've really had this deep dive into the difference between a mainstream journey in language learning and a heritage language journey. Elsie was born in the UK, and Finnish is a very marginal language. So there are very few speakers of it, and of course it doesn't feature anywhere within the educational curricula. But coming from a Finnish background where language learning is a given and there is quite a high prestige in language learning, I was shocked to enter my daughter into the UK system where her languages background and this wealth of multilingual ability that she brings wasn't acknowledged in any shape or form. So that was the beginning of Elsie's educational journey in the UK, and we have since moved back to Finland. So today, Elsie is a bilingual Finnish-English child in Finland, and her experience is very different. So she is actually getting 2 hours per week of mother language teaching in English, and obviously doing her schooling in Finnish. And the English language classes run alongside other heritage languages, including Polish and Turkish and Chinese and Urdu and about 15 other languages. It's actually the local council that has to provide these mother tongue languages if there are at least 4 children in the town with this language. Bearing in mind that we live in quite a small town in Finland of less than 60,000 people. And Elsie also has, as part of her schooling from grade 1 onwards, English teaching, and she'll be starting Spanish next year. And we've heard today, and of course we all know otherwise as well, that in the UK, the teaching of heritage languages is very marginal and mostly linked to volunteer clubs and volunteer organisations. So we all know that in the UK, we need to have more and better support for languages education. The way that I want to approach this is really thinking about it from a more tangible, practical, commercial aspect. We all know that languages and bilingualism have huge value and benefits. Here today, we know that we're all language people. But from the point of view of being able to, in the educational system, to compete with STEM subjects, so science and technology and engineering and mathematics, which is what we have to do in order to gain more ground for languages, we need to talk about the practical, tangible uses that languages have in the society and for the economy. So from where I'm sitting, there are two almost conflicting assets that we have through languages. The first one is access to services, and that links to the idea of heritage languages. So the UK is hugely multilingual, and we need to provide services to people who are unable to have access to services in English. And we also need to provide multilingual translation and interpreting services for service providers so that they're able to communicate with the multilingual community around them. That's one side of it. And the other side is international trade. So we need languages in order to promote global trade, exporting and importing. And these are the elements that I want to explore today. And I wanted to bring to you a few key figures, key indicators to show how wide this gap actually between these two are. So on the left-hand side now, you can see the UK's top 10 community languages as per the latest census. And it's something that I'm sure all recognize. We've got Polish, Romanian, Punjabi, Urdu, then Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, Bengali, Gujarati, and Italian. We also know that languages education in the UK is very limited. And this is what we see on the right-hand side. So top 4 languages in primary education in England: French, Spanish, German, and it goes right down, German and Mandarin Chinese, 3%. And that's it. All other languages are so marginal that they don't even feature in the British Council's Language Trends 2023. But what we also know from the same report is that 9 out of 10 schools have pupils with English as an additional language, and nearly 1 in 5 pupils have a first language that is other than English. So we've got this huge resource within our communities that we're really not using or even acknowledging in the educational system. A couple of other indicators as well. Now moving into the economic value and the international trade angle. So the top 5 languages for the UK to become a truly global nation, according to the British Council's Languages for the Future report: Spanish, Mandarin Chinese, French, Arabic, and German. And then the top 10 emerging markets with the most potential to the UK's economy: China, India, Brazil, South Korea, Mexico, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Taiwan, and Poland. This is where we start seeing the intersection between the value of our heritage and community languages to this idea of international trade and global communication. What we know is that we need to create more space for languages in education at all levels, starting from primary onwards up to further education, higher education, and into the industry. The question is, how do we change the narrative? Because these figures indicate, and we know from our own experiences, that languages are an immensely underused and under-acknowledged resource in the UK's economy. The mainstream languages are, and the heritage and community languages are even more so. And I believe that we as language people actually have a huge responsibility and an opportunity to change this narrative. The question is how? How do we position languages alongside STEM subjects as hard skills and not just soft skills? How do we position languages as an element that brings serious benefits to the society and economy as a whole, that complements the narrative that we as language people understand and accept of all these other benefits that languages bring? There is a huge amount of work that has already been done here. And of course, today we've heard of many amazing initiatives and programs. These are just a few of the ones that are out there already. The new National Consortium for Languages Education and the language hubs that they're putting together to promote language learning across the UK. The success of the Mandarin Excellence Programme in the UK, and the new Languages Gateway that has just opened at the end of last year. All of these are initiatives, some of these funded by the UK government, to promote languages and languages education. This is fantastic, and we need to support these. We need to share information. We need to show that we're on the side of these initiatives and this work. What I also believe is that we need to make more noise about these hard skills, the value that languages bring to the economy, international trade, exporting and importing. This is what we've been doing in the ATC. Others have done this as well. So as well as talking about the value of languages to individuals, to the society, to development, to skills, we need to add to that to say that the lack of foreign language skills is costing the UK up to 3.5% of GDP. Non-exporters face hurdles and barriers if they don't have the language skills. Companies that make use of language capabilities are 30% more successful in exporting than those who don't. And that investing in languages education will return more than the investment cost. Using the Mandarin Excellence Programme as a template, the University of Cambridge and RAND Europe together demonstrated that we've got double the returns if we invest into other languages, like we've already done for Mandarin Chinese. And this is where we now converge within this idea of, are we talking about mainstream languages? Are we talking about heritage languages? How are they different? What different types of services they facilitate? Are we talking about international trade, or are we talking about access to community services? This is where I think we're probably attacking the question from the wrong angle. So I would like to propose that instead of perpetuating the division between mainstream and heritage languages, when we talk about the value of languages, we don't differentiate. So we don't talk about mainstream. We don't necessarily talk about heritage or even community languages. I think we should simply talk about languages as an enabler for global communication, and everything comes within that umbrella. And that's me. Thank you.
Raisa, thank you. Thank you for the great work that ATC are doing, and thank you for highlighting the huge benefits of languages. However, when it comes down to, what all this comes down to is respective countries' approaches to languages, and that tends to inform the space to learn diverse languages. Also, the top 4 languages you mentioned, they can contribute to discrimination, amongst other things. And the other thing is at a fundamental level, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. And let me give you my own example. Within my own family, I'm of British Pakistani heritage. I grew up understanding 3 languages, but only being able to speak 2. And I'm sure I'm not alone in this. What I've found with the next generation within my family is that they've not had that sufficient exposure to our languages, our spoken languages, or heritage languages, if you like, something that you want to eradicate that, the heritage element of it, which I understand. But despite being bilingual or multilingual, we all tend to speak English at home, unless my parents are visiting, the older generation who spoke those, the mother tongue. So does the onus to shift all this, to change the narrative, fall on families to preserve their languages at home as well as advocating for it? Or is it something that we need to push policymakers to address? Especially, you've highlighted trade and so on. So is that push something more for policymakers?
I think it is the policymakers who are going to facilitate that. Families have got a huge role to play, but I think this is where we see the difference between the community heritage languages that traditionally and still today, we see them as something in the community rather than a massive resource for the whole of the country and the economy. But the only way that we're going to shift those languages into becoming part of mainstream education is to work on the government to recognize the immense resource that these languages have, and that's a policy decision. So and we know that in the UK, especially compared to other countries, it is the hardcore economic value that weighs much more than the soft skills, and this is where the UK is very different to other countries and other economies. So I think very much that it is a policy decision, but of course all of us bilingual, multilingual families have got a responsibility to make more noise about it and to demand for languages education, not just because we want to keep a language alive in our community or in our families, but because it brings real value to the whole of the country and the economy.
Absolutely. And also, we've had requests from our audience for your presentation because it's so fascinating, so interesting. So I was wondering if that's something you can share with LC
Yes.
Agency.
Yeah, I think I've sent it along this morning, so it should be in the email inbox somewhere already. And all of these reports and all of these indicators can be found online, so it's all accessible. Nothing is hidden. So fantastic if you can continue to share that with the audience as well. Thank you.
And audience, you've heard it, it's publicly available, so you've got your question answered. Thank you so much, Raisa. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.